Today we have a very special session uh, in terms of a country whose literature has exploded after 2001, and then in 2009 it got a new boost. What we're extremely privileged by is that some people then become trailblazers after certain years elapse beach mein. And for Pakistan, that has been Durre Aziz Amna in terms of fiction in English. Na sirf ye, but if you read the essays that she's also put out, those, I think, this is my personal opinion, that some of the highest quality prose that's come out in essay format, that's not particularly political. It's not reportage. It's about people's experiences. It's about the lived experience and how that's translated in different countries. So Durre Aziz wrote American Fever. Before this, that was her first novel. So वहाँ से आगाज करेंगे, and then we'll segue into a splintering. So I'm going to say right at the beginning and also right at the end that you can get it. It's available outside at the last word. And if you're fortunate like I am, so she might sign it. Might. So it's conditional. So if we can give a round to Durre, that would be very nice. मुख्तसर सा बस अगर हम आगाज करें with American Fever vis-a-vis a splintering. So that book, it's also about someone who goes to the United States, starts studying there, and it's about a lot of interiority, private thoughts, private experiences, how this person grows. This canvas in a splintering is much broader, and it seems like there's a lot of external turbulence also, which sometimes affects the characters, often it does not. I mean, so many times, I'm not spoiling anything because this is right at the beginning, but you can stop me. They go to Islamabad from their village, and it's dated 9th April 1988, which is the eve of the Ojdi camp blast. और वो इतना बड़ा सानिया है, but you have the main, and I'd like to talk about the main character for a while. She says, by contrast, that day for me in Islamabad was liberating. It was freedom. The destruction that I saw was something completely distinct. So these two things, the much broader canvas, and second, how the external, there's a lot of turbulence outside, how that's affecting the personal. What was your perspective while writing that?
Yeah, so I will start off just by, of course, thanking the Indus Conclave and also particularly thanking Asad. I feel like walking around with Asad is like walking around with a celebrity, and very, very rightfully so, because he's so incredibly accomplished, and I truly have to pinch myself to believe that I'm here, that we're talking about my book with him. Yeah, I think that it's an interesting comparison with American Fever, because I think there's a lot of writers, and I think I include myself in them, who feel like the first book is a throat-clearing exercise.
Yes.
And so you're doing that before you actually start talking. And I think that some of American Fever was that I also currently feel about it the way one does about an ex, where you're really trying to shed off the skin. And so it's hard for me to be generous about that book. But I think that it had to be the book that it was. I think it was me grappling with a lot of questions of my own about language and identity and home and what is home and all of those very standard and to me now not so interesting questions. But yes, I think there's a time and place, of course, for those questions, and there was that itch that had to be scratched, and it was. And once I'd written that, I wanted to turn my eye back to, I wanted to write a book that was set entirely in Pakistan, that was set really entirely in Punjab, in a very small part of Punjab, that the main character is from the town that she's in and then the capital that she migrates to. While at the same time, as you said, sort of bringing in a lot of what is happening at the time. A big influence for me has been the works of Elena Ferrante.
Yes.
And anytime someone says that they see shadows of her work, I think that is the biggest honor I can get, which is I find that the way she's able to bring in the political into the personal lives of particularly of women is just remarkable. And so I think a lot of it was also originating from that place of a desire for imitation, I believe.
Brilliant. So that people can get a feel of the prose. The prose is compulsive. So you have to keep turning the page. And again, I'm going to stop a few inches short of spoiling it. It's in terms of the choices that people make, it tends to shock, it tends to upset, and it does things that literature should be doing, which is making you ask hard questions and making you understand the capacity other people have to shock you, actually. So if we could get a feel of that, if you'd like to do a reading, entirely your call. From where?
Yeah, no, I'm very happy to. So I will just start with the very first couple of pages of the book so that no one needs any context.
Or agar phone please silent kar dein, I'd be grateful.
I wonder where to start. As I tell you my story, will you find it hard to empathize? I am what some call an unrelatable character, and I have done something unthinkable. But I implore you to listen. As the storyteller, I need you on my side, and we know that a story is only as good as its beginning. So let my story begin with rage. By then, I had already made the classic move from the town to the city. Classic because that is the tale of half this country, millions leaving the smallness and filth of the agrarian for the mythical promise of the urban. I was one of them. The day I left behind the place of my birth was the happiest of my life. I married an accountant and bore him 2 children. We were renting a small, tidy flat on a quiet street. There was an afternoon in 1998. It must have been June because a major nuclear test was all over the news, when the first monsoon rains hit the city. We were all napping in the same bed when the thunder woke me up. I looked over at my 2 children, small and innocent in their sleep. I thought of the nuclear test conducted underground. Had it sounded like thunder? Then I drifted back to sleep, comforted by the rain, by the children's rhythmic breathing, by the cool wind making its way in through an open window. I remember thinking, as sleep clouded my brain, that here it was, all that I had wanted for myself: the city flat, the husband, the children. In that moment, I was wholly content, as if now could begin the second half of my life as a blank, happy woman, as if the nervous entanglements of my life had fallen away. But no, they had not. At the time, I had started teaching art to younger students at one of the best private schools in the city. The pay wasn't terrible, and more importantly, teachers' children attended for free. I couldn't believe my luck to see my children mingling with the richest families in the city, being taught by the most sought-after teachers, learning to talk in crisp, fluent English. It all made me giddy with pride and happiness at first. Have you ever had the experience of climbing one rung of a ladder and finding yourself around so much wealth it makes you nauseous? Never in my life, before or after, have I been so queasy. There is no other word for it. When I saw a student climb out of a chauffeured car, or when I smelled the perfume wafting from the mothers who came to collect their children, their hair perfectly coiffed, their elegant clothes so fashionable, I was overcome. It was an affluence I couldn't fathom. How much could that polished car have cost? How big were their houses? When I shared my deep, festering anger with my husband, he scoffed. "Don't fall for the show of wealth. It's all a performance," he said, which bewildered me. Of course it was a performance. That was what made it impressive. I wanted that performance, that way of holding oneself in the world. I wanted it with a longing that threatened to drown me. Okay, I think I'll start there.
So going forward from this particular passage, there was a review of this book in which they said that the main character, this is a hearty or a softie, so it's Tara. Tara is not particularly likable, and yet we're rooting for her throughout. So I didn't understand how this reviewer was able to put these two pieces of a sentence together, and then I read it and I fully understood. And the reason I was rooting for her is that there seems to be a constant hunger for self-advancement in a way that, frankly, is quite admirable. So that then turns into this, this determination and this willpower. How did this person enter your mind, and how did her choices become, steeper and steeper and steeper with that goal just within her reach?
Yeah, I find that so interesting because I don't think there's anything wrong with, obviously, with unlikable characters. I think they're part of most of the literature that we really love. At the same time, I've never considered Tara unlikable, and so it sort of catches me off guard anytime someone does. And if, in fact, if we were to compare it with the main character in American Fever, my first book, I find it much easier to dislike Hira, who's the character from the first book, because to me, she is in a lot of ways like so evidently spoiled and so evidently privileged. Whereas Tara just represents to me that sort of ambition that I think anyone who's done anything
Yes.
has within them. And I think it's the question of how much are you willing to fetter or unfetter that ambition. And that's sort of the decision that the reader themselves has to make, that what is their limit? Like, where will they follow this woman till? And I think I was trying to test the reader's limit of, okay, at what point do you think, okay, she's done way too much, like she's crossed the line? And I think that idea of crossing the line, I mean, I think obviously it exists for everyone. For women anywhere in the world, for women particularly in this country, I think that line is such a huge part of our negotiations with the public and private. So I was constantly thinking of that line and where to draw it and where the reader will follow her till.
Excellent. And I'd like to speak about class in a second. But before this, though, if we can also discuss the men. And the men, quite a few of them, I might be wrong, this was, my subjective interpretation, but have complete hormonal imbalances sometimes, in the middle. So you see them, doing step one, step two, and then they end up completely somewhere else. And it seems to be something that's undomesticated. And you've illustrated it very well that, and it's quite tragic, that there are circumstances beyond their control, and so they just sort of revert back to form when that thing is, if you'll excuse the Gen Z expression, but triggered. So you've written, and this is what the mother is saying. Bear in mind, please, everyone here is a character. This is not the author's view, and this is to be said throughout the book. So she says, Tara's mother says, who is an extremely multifaceted person on her own, a man's only a man between 15 and 50. So I thought we'd just talk about that for a second and then get to the class part.
Yeah, so the hormonal thing is strictly your language. I am not calling my men hormonal at all. Yeah, I think that. The other day I read this quote by Margaret Atwood that said that inside every woman is a man watching a woman. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I started shivering when I read the quote because it feels, and I mean, Atwood is Canadian, of course, our context is totally different, but is it?
Right.
Clearly it's not, because I was able to relate so deeply to that. And I think, yeah, I think I've spent my entire life studying men. And because you have to, because again, like, you're constantly thinking about how they think about you or how they perceive you, not simply as a vanity exercise, but because it can have very direct implications on your life. And so I think that, and it's so funny because this is what great conversations do. They sort of illuminate parts of the book that you were not fully aware of. But I think a lot of writing this book was actually like thinking about men and what men do, even more than what Tara herself does. But like, it was a character study in men and what societies expect of men and what they make them do and how they sort of act out those masculinities on
Right.
other people.
And in addition to the men, the women also can be quite unforgiving with each other. So I was just thinking, is that part of that larger dynamic? Or would you say, no, this is an independent set of problems? Just very.
No, I mean, yeah, I think it's definitely, I think it's all related. I think just when you exist within a structure that's extremely patriarchal, and there's a feeling that there aren't enough seats at the table, if you will, for the women, and you have to constantly prove that you are worthy of that seat at the table, you are worthy of respect. And so I think that certainly has the ability to turn women against each other, which I think is a big part of the book as well.
And so it starts with that quite clear. So there's a binary. There's men and there's women. But what I thought was quite extraordinary about this is that after a certain point, there is just one thing, though, that transcends gender also, and that's class. And so we see that the brother who has sort of loomed over Tara as this, sort of malignant sort of force, when he's also brought into the city after her, so he's immediately dwarfed. And she feels sympathy towards him in that one moment. She thinks that he's, quite vulnerable, which is not something she's seen before. And one thing that's refreshing is that there's a lot of books of Pakistani fiction in English, which are a start to finish Bediyan farmhouse party. So, it's of the rich by the rich. What made you really get into the blood and guts of class, which is a subject that people here, specifically here, maybe everywhere, don't like to talk about much? It's something invisible, and it's something that's sort of swept under the rug.
Yeah. Do you really think so? Because I think that there are so many, there's so many books. I think class is so inescapable in Pakistan, and it's sort of like, it's very much the air that we breathe. And so, I can think of a lot of books, I will not name names, but that do deal with class just in a perhaps different way than a splintering does. I think, I think the biggest differentiation is the fact that Tara comes herself from this lower middle class background, and she's so I'm thinking of like a book like Danial Moinuddin's book, which I absolutely love, but I think the strongest elements of that book are always when it's a very upper class character detailing their life, because that feels much truer and much more authentically told. And I think that perhaps it's from just being brought up and raised in a particular subset of the society, or seeing what my parents had to go through and whatnot. So I think it's, and the other thing is also because Tara she's not a socialist, right? So she is not for wealth equality in any way or form. She is simply the one who's trying to become the richest or the rich. And so I think that perhaps it is because I went in with this character who is so unapologetic about not thinking of class as a bad thing. She's like, this is the air that we breathe. How do I climb the ladder within it? that I think gave me the freedom to talk about class in a different way.
And on that, there's another gentleman who says to her, and this was a sort of an inversion of what, you read about middle class virtue. But he says, he told me his theory of the middle. What you have to do, he said, is avoid the middle. And that he'd rather live in a shanty than in a middle class flat. One, I'm skipping over, when you were in the middle, you were always anxious about slipping and sliding, up or down, and that anxiety could take over your life. One had to do everything possible to escape the middle. Now, obviously, afterwards she says, well, would you rather be in a hovel than this lavish hotel room? Could you say more about that particular paragraph? Because it stayed with me.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it did because I wrote it with a lot of heart. I think I feel like so much of my life as a person, but also as a writer, is consumed by thinking about class, but particularly about that exact middle class feeling of not feeling like you're neither here nor there, and you are constantly feeling like there's someone above you and there's more to be done. And then it's also you have enough resources to even consider that you could be, or the delusion perhaps, to even consider that you might one day rise up. But at the same time, you have enough resources to sustain that delusion more than someone who has nothing. And I think that, I think what it does also is, I distinctly remember, I think it was when and it was so funny because you and Fasi in the morning were talking about the lawyer protest in 2006-07.
Yes.
And I remember wanting to go out, and because the रैली ऊपर तक आई थी, जाहिर सी बात है, और हमारे घर के बाहर से गुजरी थी, एंड मैंने अपने अबू से कहा था कि मैंने भी जाना है बाहर. एंड आई सो विविडली रिमेंबर व्हाट ही सेड. ही वाज लाइक, बेटा ये जो सियासत है ना, ये या अमीरों के काम है या गरीबों के काम है, ये हमारे काम नहीं है. एंड इट वाज जस्ट लाइक सो क्लियर इन हिज हेड. इट वाज लाइक, नो, दिस इज, we are the people that do not take risks. Either if you have absolutely nothing to lose, and then you will take the risk, or then you will not lose nothing by taking the risk. And so I think that I'm just so fascinated by that middle place of, because the character says, like, it does make you very risk averse, it makes you very compliant, but it can also fill you with a lot of resentment.
No, completely. I mean, short digression, because, you touched on the lawyers movement, but in 2007, as a junior most intern at a particular firm, these senior associates were going out to protest, and they said, you're coming along. And I said, there's no way I'm coming along. There's no chance. And they said, why? And I still remember the main guy who was saying so, he read my mind, and he said, जब आप टीवी पे आओगे तो आपके मामा पापा को ये नहीं पता चलेगा. You won't come on TV, no one will see you, your parents won't find out. That's exactly what I was thinking. What if, So that's quite something that he said to you. Isse hat ke, beyond the binaries, there's also a lot about motherhood here. It completely changes her perspective. And she talks about it sort of in terms of it was a blur, in terms of how profoundly it affected her. And it again tells her about, this was one part of my life, the 50%, and then everything else was outside of these kids. So why is this a through line, I think, during this book? As in, you basically, she grows up less than the kids grow up, and you watch them grow up, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So there's the very sort of like obvious, sort of boring answer, which is that while I was writing this book is when I became a mother, and so it was sort of, again, like inescapable. It was, constantly on my mind, and that feeling of it being a blur. And I think I believe every single mother, and probably a lot of fathers too, like, feel that way about raising children, that it feels like a blur, and you close your eyes and it's all gone, but like the time itself is just, I don't know. I think there's something about parenthood just really, really, really messes with time. But the other reason, I think, was that I did want to give Tara some kind of redemption. Yes. And for me, the biggest arc for redemption for her comes through her role as a mother. I think that the way she talks about her children or the feelings that she has about her children are perhaps the most sincere part of her. And that's where you're really able to see. And I don't think it's, it's fully here or there. It's not as if she wants to get rich only for her children. But I think that a lot of what is motivating her to make these choices and take these risks is her feeling of responsibility towards her children. And I've heard this from various readers who say, we like really wanted to hate her, and then we saw the way she talked about her children. So I think I was trying to do that.
Also, this is not a preachy book. This is the opposite of a preachy book. But the catalyst is clear that for everyone to escape their lives or their previous lives, and this I think has to do with Tara's husband also in terms of his appreciation for things, is education. And so you see that while the other sisters have to go through what their mother went through, Tara has been singled out, which we often see in these setups as, well, this is the kid who will, as they say, the poor kid that made good.
Yeah.
And so
put all the eggs in one basket.
All the eggs in one basket. I'm going to try and seclude her from the depredations of her environment and make sure that she does something with her life, which is something that even the men around her are cognizant of and actually have benefited from. So this basically is a case for education without being presented as such.
Yeah.
But that was basically something that I had observed.
Yeah. The one thing I wanted to say, because you brought up the lawyers' movement, and I'm thinking about the sort of socio-political landscape that pervades the entire. So the book basically starts with Zia's death and is bookended by Benazir's. That's sort of the rough timeline. And I found it so interesting to, again, like to hear you guys talk, because I feel like this book is retelling all of those things that happened, but from a very specific lens of this woman. And so I remember, शायद बहुत से लोगों ने पढ़ी हो, एक किताब है खदीजा मस्तूर की, आंगन, and a friend recommended it and I read it, and I absolutely hated it. And not hated in a, it was such a suffocating read, because it's all set, I'm sure a lot of people know, एक ही एक आंगन है और उसमें ही, I think the entire story, you never leave the courtyard. It's all set within the courtyard. The men are like going in and out. They're going into jail for the sort of like independence movement protests in the 40s. They're coming out of jail. कोई मतलब कोई बाहर है, कोई किसी के साथ कोई झगड़ा हो रहा है, सारा कुछ. लेकिन the action is all contained within the courtyard. And I found it so stifling but so real. And I think that in some ways I was trying to write A Splintering as a history of Pakistan from the courtyard.
Yes, and it's conflicting histories and conflicting politics. So the father here, he weeps when he finds out about Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's execution, but the brother makes sure that all the sisters mourn when General Zia's plane crash happens. So when you were doing this, did you ever think, how much do I want politics, history, all these things that are happening? And then it's when you read this from the courtyard's horizon that you realize this is a country that rapidly changes between 1988 and 2007, and not just in the political sense, but their day-to-day lives. So the television shows up, and then in the end, they're struggling with dial-up internet. So if you'd want to speak to that also.
Yeah, I think, I feel that so much because I don't live in the US. I don't live in Pakistan at the moment. I live in the US. And so I feel like anytime I come back here, even if it's like a year or two, I feel like landscapes have shifted. So my family's in Pindi, and I came in May, and there wasn't an underpass in Sadr, and then I came in September, and now there's an underpass in Sadr. So it's just the way cities are shifting and the way cities are expanding. I think it really is extremely different from the way a place like the US is, where it feels like infrastructure has sort of reached its peak, and you're not really going to see that kind of like massive development. It's just the resources have been, or things are too expensive, or I don't know what it is, but it's just a cap has been reached, whereas it doesn't feel like the case here. And so I wanted to also represent that within the book. And I think all the politics, I mean, it felt inescapable. Some of it was, for the chaska of like, okay, matlab is waqt bahir kya ho raha hoga, TV pe kya ho raha hoga. Lekin a lot of things, like you suddenly there's a dharna and you're not going to school for 2 weeks. That feels very real. That feels like a very, very plausible plot point. So I think that it was a mix of wanting to bring in that history, but also finding the history inescapable. At the same time, I do want to write the caveat that I don't particularly, I mean, it's different for Pakistani readers who will be very familiar with everything. Like I did not want to write the book as like a history of Pakistan for the foreigner. So my point was never to educate about what is happening in Pakistan. That is obviously your job. Lekin it is far beyond my pay scale, but also I don't think that's the domain of the novel.
No, and it's not expository at all. They basically show up and these circumstances have already taken place. So I think this is where you, with any novel, you sort of enter into the domain of the abstract. There are certain choices that are made throughout the course of Tara's life, and we see towards the end that those choices have consequences. And it also seems that, and this might be something that's part of everyone's individual experience, they start to impact her soul also, and you can see that this is actually taking a physical toll on her. So when you were thinking of, navigating this character's course, what were your thoughts in terms of where you wanted this to go? And this is, I know, a very up-in-the-air question.
It's okay. I will attempt. I think so. The very initial idea was there is a woman who wants what a lot of us want, which is to be just filthy rich. But unlike most of us, she will not stop at anything. And so it was basically a writing experiment in how far you could make her go. And at the same time, I mean, I guess this is hard to say without really giving things away, but I do think that a lot of what Tara does in the book, we consider inexcusable in this society.
Right.
And whether she does get away with it at the end or not is, I will leave that to the reader to find out. But for a big part of the book, she gets away with these things. And so it was also just a thought experiment and not even necessarily a thought experiment. I think for the cases that we see of women being punished for certain things, there are probably thousands of women who aren't punished for those same things. I think obviously the way the fear operates is as long as you can punish one of them, it's the fear that disciplines and not necessarily the punishment itself. But yeah, I don't think I fully answered your question. But
no, that's a complete answer. And she does something else throughout, which is that she visualizes where she wants to go. In that way, this is, a pretty hopeful book, which is that if you dream it, you can do it. Those dreams take the form of, unless I'm wrong, they take the form of movies.
Yes.
And towards the end, she's become such a great cinematographer in her own mind that when she's put in front of a television, she thinks this is really boring, badly written stuff. And I would have developed these characters and these storylines differently. And that's something she has right from the start. In a different sense, she also, modulates her voice, how she speaks. When she's sitting in front of the PTV, the newscaster people, and just seeing how she can shift to speaking more sophisticated Urdu. So, what did you think about these processes?
Yeah, I'm so happy you brought up the TV thing twice, because I do think that, and we were, right before this, there was the panel with Muhammad Hanif, who was talking about how, if you go to like a desert in Cholistan and you talk to someone, like that person will at least understand Urdu, even if they can't respond back in it. And of course, like so much of that has been state TV and radio, and that's the way that, and it's not obviously just in Pakistan. We hear about how the BBC was instrumental in sort of like uniformizing the British accent, whereas like before people actually used to have extremely different accents, whereas now it's sort of merged into one. And so, but about the films, it sort of again goes back to the Atwood quote of like within a woman, there's a man watching a woman, because so Tara does this thing, the main character, where she spends hours and hours imagining scenarios in her head where she is both the director, so she's obviously the one making up these scenarios, but she's also the one acting out.
Sorry, just to say, यहाँ से जरा खामोश हो जाएं, please. जरा आवाज नहीं आ रही है. Thank you so much.
But the critical thing is that she is always imagining these scenarios from the perspective of the man in those scenarios. So if she is in her film, if she is having coffee with a man, she is the man watching the woman. And again, that feels very true to my own experience. A lot of this like idea of the film in the head comes from just how I felt like I lived and live. And at some point, I think there's just also a motif for like that desire to imagine yourself as anything except what you are at the moment.
And she's upset at the end also, well, towards the end, about that not being the man in that particular story either.
Yeah.
This is something that actually gets worse and worse with time.
Yeah.
So the other thing, and this is, maybe slightly conceptual, there is another character in this book, which is her brother's wife. So the sister-in-law. And this might be a, narcissism of minor differences thing where you tend to dislike a person extra if you see that they resemble you in terms of their ambitions, in terms of things that they, might want to be. They, in a really strange, perverse sense, they sort of mirror each other throughout the book. And her sisters are sort of different sorts of mirrors, which is the people left behind, but also who tend to surprise her in terms of how they've also internally grown in their own ways. So when doing this, did you have that tension in mind, that these are alternate realities, and particularly in the sister-in-law's case, that, she sort of turns into a monster in her own right. Not monster as in the but
Yeah,
a big
no.
deal, so to speak.
No, thank you. That's so perceptive, the comment about the narcissism of small differences, because it felt that way because I actually, when I initially created the sister-in-law in the beginning, I didn't expect her to show up again in the form that she does towards the end of the novel. And again, like, I'm sure obviously no one here has read the book. It just came out, so it might be a little abstract for you.
It's outside. Everyone can buy it. It's at the last word.
But yes, when she showed up again, it really felt like she was that sort of mirror image, and the reason why Tara reacts so viscerally to her. And there's a scene where her family's sort of telling her off, like, what is wrong with you? Like, she's here, she's also a madam. You wanted to be a madam, she's a madam. But that is the reason why she is so viscerally, and she like notices all the small ways in which she feels like she has adapted to the city in a more classy manner. She like wears the right kind of clothes, whereas her sister-in-law still has like the stench of the province, and she, is still wearing the garish makeup and like the clothes that are with the sequins that clearly show that, okay, you might still be from the village. And so she's so hyper-focused on these differences because to prove to herself that she is not her.
And not a goofy craft question, I promise. But like you said, you did not anticipate she'd go here. As a writer who's written, one acclaimed novel and now written a second one, did you ever feel that your characters tend to just go crazy on their own? And where you had started out, you did not expect that they would maybe just sort of develop things of their own and end up where you might not have initially projected them to be?
Yeah, and there's no way to say that without sounding a little woo-woo, but it does feel like at some point, and it happened less so with American Fever, which followed a much more autobiographical framework, so I knew from the start what would happen. But with this one, I very much did not. And there were certain things that, I mean, there's a lot of things that Tara does where, like, even now when I try not to reread the book because it's very complicated to reread something that you've read yourself, as I'm sure you know. But there are times when I, reread passages and I'm like, Fallah, इसने ये भी कर दिया था, इसने ये भी किया था. So I think it does, the characters do surprise you sometimes.
And from American Fever to A Splintering, you touched on this in the beginning, but I thought if we could just get a bit more on what made you ground this in Mazinagar, her village, in the provinces, in Islamabad, in Rawalpindi, versus American Fever, which sort of operates in that particular jurisdiction.
I was thinking that you might be asking why didn't you write another Karachi or Lahore
No,
novel? Okay.
no.
I could never write a Karachi or Lahore novel.
Why not?
I think there are plenty of Karachi and Lahore novels.
Plenty, yeah, enough said.
And very, very good ones. And so, yeah, that's a great question. So much of American Fever, as I said, was about language. There's a lot of untranslated Urdu in there because I was trying to, prove to myself and to potential readers that, again, those questions of identity and which language do you write in, and I have gotten to a point where I find that line of thought very suffocating and very unproductive. And also at the same time, I was very, very tired of the migration novel, not because there's so many amazing ways to write it, but I felt like I was at a point where I had nothing new to say about the East-West encounter. And I don't think I still have anything new to add to it. So I felt like I wanted to just return to Pakistan, but also specifically to the region of Pakistan, the Salt Range that I know, I know the back of my hand. And it's a landscape that evokes a lot in me. It's a landscape that I immediately feel the absence of as soon as you come down the Salt Range and the plains start. And it's so different. I don't know if other people experience that, but so it's a landscape that has shaped my parents. And Mazinagar, I will say, is, as I'm sure you know, a fictional place because it is brief. It is sort of modeled on a real place, but because the real place is so small, and Tara speaks about that place so virulently and so angrily that I didn't want a real place to get all that sort of poisonous vitriol from her. And so I changed the name. I mean, it obviously means City of the Past, which can imply certain things. But yeah, I really just wanted to go back not only to this, overall Pakistan, but specifically the region of Pakistan that I know the most.
Bilkul sahi. We'll open it up to a few questions towards the end. Not that. No, then, ठीक. G. Sorry? Okay, where he gave us a time check basically. So G, over there please. Mic zara dete hain. And if anyone else has any, to just do this. We can take a few.
Hi. Am I not too loud?
जी थोड़ा सा ऊंचा आप उसमें कहिएगा. It's working.
Okay. My name is Samya, and I would like to know that how did you pursue writing? I mean, what was your background? How did you delve into it?
Are we taking a few?
No, I think we can just.
So my path was that I was always a very, very voracious reader, but then I started writing for the youth periodicals. Like, I think the News used to have a page for the youth. It was called Us. I don't know if it still exists, but those sort of youth magazines. I started submitting various things. I started off more in the journalism, nonfiction track, and then only committed to writing my first novel in 2018.
जी इधर कर लें जरा
Hi. Apart from the fact that you grew up in Rawalpindi or Islamabad, the reason why you decided to situate the novel in Rawalpindi is because you wish to put it on the literary map. Was it any such attempt?
Sorry, was it any such? Could you repeat?
attempt to put Rawalpindi on the literary map, given the excess of, well, not excess, every book is a good book, of Lahore and Karachi novels.
No, I mean, I don't think I'm trying to do any representational work. So I don't really particularly care if Rawalpindi gets a novel or not. But in my case, my novel had to be a Rawalpindi novel.
So we'll take one last question. I thought Raza had a mic instead of a bottle of water. And then we'll conclude. Raza, just for the fans, you know, just, nahi? Acha, we'll take, ye ji. Uzma aunty ko mic dein.
Hello. Okay, so you told us that you worked in an institution in which you were actually dealing with people who belonged to a certain class, and that impacted and that influenced your way of thinking, your way of being, because you were not of that class, right? And do you want to go back in time and work in a place where there were people belonging to the same class, the students, the teachers, the parents, all? And do you think that that would influence your future, working at that school in which all the people were of same class, and you being open to, and you being very aware of what's happening in other people's lives belonging to a certain class, the shiny cars and the big houses? So did it help you become who you are today? And how did it influence you?
So I'm assuming that this is, you're referring to the passage that I read out from. Because, so that is told from the perspective of I guess the I from the beginning sort of confuses the reader, but that is told from the perspective of the character herself. So that has nothing to do with me. And the character of Tara actually has, beyond just the similarities of being from the same region, I have very little in common with Tara, which, I mean, if you read the book, I assure you that will be a pleasant thing to know.
So this book, as was said a few times before, is more than available. Well, it's not more, it's very few copies. So please rush there as fast as you can and maybe get it signed. We're very, very grateful to Durre Aziz Amna for being here and talking about yet another groundbreaking novel, A Splintering, and it's outside. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Asad.
And the Field Marshal for this initiative, Mr. Raza Guraya, has said that an event is starting right after this. So if you'd like to stay seated, that would be wonderful for the Indus Conclave. Thank you so much, and thank you to him.